Howdy again everyone, and welcome to what may well be the only review on YouTube, that I can find anyway, of probably the rarest Canon L lens, even rarer than that 50mm f1.0 lens I tested a few years ago. One of the first Canon EF mount lenses and one of the first autofocus L lenses, the EF 50-200mm f3.5 to 4.5 L came out in 1988, costing just over 100,000 yen, or a little over £600 or $700 US. Nowadays, if you can even find one on eBay, they tend to go for half that price, unless you can find a bargain. It's a full-frame lens that works with any Canon digital SLR or any Canon mirrorless camera if you use the right adapter. Don't confuse it with Canon's even older 50-200mm non-L lens, which had a less sophisticated optical construction. Apparently it's not very good at all. One of the only videos on YouTube about this thing is some guy talking about how he got defrauded on eBay by one of the cheaper 50-200mm lenses, which had a false red ring glued to the end. I'm lucky enough to have the real deal here, the real L lens, and it's in absolutely mint condition, as good as new, as you can see. Considering the lens's weak build quality though, more on that in a moment, I'd be really cautious about buying one that's been very well used. The first thing I liked about this lens was its unusual zoom range. If it went any wider than 50mm, it'd be a super zoom lens, and that maximum aperture of f3.5 to 4.5 is a little brighter than a super zoom lens also, enabling you to get some really rather out of focus backgrounds. I'm hoping this lens's optics are good, even if the build quality is a bit off the wall, as we're about to see. It's based on a metal lens mount and made of good quality plastics, and it's not very heavy. That's the end of the good news though. It uses an old-fashioned push-pull zoom mechanism. In my copy of the lens, in new condition, it worked reasonably smoothly but not heavily enough to prevent falling under its own weight if you hold it upright. It doesn't exactly take long to get used to push-pull zoom though, as you might imagine. It's pretty simple really, just not everyone's cup of tea. The lens's focus system is also quite antiquated, but in fairness it works okay. When set to manual focus, the focus ring feels very scratchy to turn without any damping. It even makes a scratching noise as you do so. It's a bit awkward really. However, it does turn quite precisely, about 200 degrees, just about enough for telephoto focusing. As the lens changes focus, the front element extends and turns around. Again, an annoying trait in older lenses, which will be a serious pain for anyone using polarizing or graduated filters. But when you set the lens to autofocus, the focus ring does at least disconnect from the motor, so you can safely spin it around without damaging the mechanism. Oh, and whether you're zoomed in or you're zoomed out, the lens exhibits some moderately strong focus breathing here, as you can see. The autofocus motor itself is slow and noisy, as you can see here. When shooting adapted onto my Canon EOS R5, it worked reasonably accurately, nailing focus most of the time. It certainly won't be much good for shooting fast-moving subjects, but the camera's subject detection autofocus worked completely fine with it, so no serious problems here. By the way, if you're adapting this thing onto one of Canon's mirrorless cameras, then I'd highly recommend turning off continuous autofocus in your menus, otherwise this thing will be buzzing and freaking out to itself all day, flailing around as if it had been suddenly and unexpectedly transported forward in time to World War 80 and doesn't know what to do about it. Probably not good for its motor either. The lens doesn't have any extra weather sealing, but it does have an easily accessible 58mm filter thread. My Canon EOS R5 camera has in-body image stabilization. That seemed to help with this lens when shooting at wider angles, but it didn't seem to work very well when zoomed in, unfortunately. So overall, it's clear that 30 years ago, being a Canon L lens did not necessarily entail having good build quality. Alright then, image quality. No idea what to expect here, but nevertheless we'll be challenging the lens by testing it on a Canon EOS R5 with its demanding 45MP full frame sensor. You can turn in-camera corrections on in the menu for this lens, but they have absolutely no effect that I could see. At 50mm and f3.5, sharpness is okay, but we're seeing low contrast and some surprisingly strong purple fringing. Over in the corners we get softness, low contrast, and even more colour fringing. Stop down just a little to f4 to see a bit more sharpness and brightness in those corners. Back in the middle though, there's already a dramatic difference. Contrast is far improved and purple fringing is nicely reduced. At f5.6, sharpness and contrast become excellent in the middle. The corners are looking reasonably bright and sharp now, but unfortunately those lateral CAs are still spreading their colourful love all over the place. Stop down to f8 and the corners now look very sharp, and they stay that way until you stop down to about f16, where diffraction takes its toll, so it's a slightly weak start at 50mm. Let's zoom in to 120mm then, where the maximum aperture has already darkened to f4.5. Okay, in the middle of the image we're getting better sharpness and contrast than at 50mm, but that purple fringing is still really strong. The corners are looking noticeably soft with colour fringing again, although it's less than at 50mm. Stop down to f5.6 for a nice improvement in sharpness and contrast there, and back in the middle, that purple fringing has almost completely dissipated, leaving behind a very sharp image. At f8, the image is as sharp as you'll get in the middle, and happily the corners are looking very sharp now too, albeit with some colour fringing still. Here's f11 for you. Okay, finally, let's zoom all the way into 200mm. At f4.5, the good news is that purple fringing is almost completely gone, leaving a very sharp picture in the middle. Less encouraging is that the image corners are looking really very soft now. Stopping down to f5.6, f8 and f11 yields only very small improvements in those image corners, unfortunately. Overall, I was generally happy with the lens's sharpness in the middle of its images. Corner sharpness does lag behind though, and colour fringing is a real issue here also. This is the kind of performance I was expecting from a slightly ambitious zoom lens from the 1980s though. Well, let's see about distortion and vignetting. As I mentioned, your camera seemingly will not correct for these. At 50mm, any kind of distortion is very mild, but at f3.5, we do see quite strong vignetting. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for quick improvements. Zoom in to 200mm and moderately strong pincushion distortion becomes apparent, as well as more vignetting. Stopping down to f5.6 or f8 will brighten those corners though. The lens's minimum focus distance seems to be about 1.2 meters, so it can actually get quite close to your subject here. At f4.5, close-up image quality is dreadfully soft. At f5.6, contrast improves, but the image is still really soft. However, stop down to f8 and sharpness makes a nice return, so if you're shooting close-up, stop down. Let's see how well the lens works against bright light. At wider angles we see an average performance here, some flecks of flaring and a broader pattern, but nothing too heavy. Zoom in though, and as you can see, you want to keep any kind of bright lights well out of your picture. Next, bokeh. Out of focus backgrounds look mostly quite smooth here, and specular highlights look pleasingly soft with just a small hint of outlining. More complex backgrounds can sometimes look a little busy. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. You can see it evident here at f4.5, at f5.6 it's still there, but at f8 it's mostly gone. Overall, well, while I wasn't totally over the moon with this older lens's optics, they were still okay for a zoom lens from 1988, and I actually had a lot of fun with this lens, and mostly because of that cool zoom range. It's great to shoot from 50 to 200mm and still enjoy a brighter than usual maximum aperture for getting lovely out of focus backgrounds. Seriously, this was a fun lens to test out, although its quirky push-pull zoom and old-fashioned focus system certainly take getting used to, and it's always interesting to test out an older lens to see how far technology has come. Well, thanks for watching everyone. I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you didn't, then you're probably on the wrong channel. Special thanks to all my wonderful Patreon supporters who make such a difference keeping this channel going sponsorship free. Seriously, I get offers from the weirdest sponsors every few days here, but who really needs even more advertising in their lives, right? Check it out in the description below. Patreon supporters get all kinds of bonus content and early access to special reviews. Ciao for now, everyone.